On the 11th of July, 1913, on the banks of the Nile south of Cairo, an American inventor opened a valve and pumped 6,000 gallons of water per minute using nothing but sunlight. 5 mirrored troughs, each 200 feet long, tracking the sun across the sky. Within a year, an army had dismantled it for scrap metal, and the idea went quiet for a century. Today you can run the household version for a couple of $100s. A small solar pump, a tank, and a $40 yard hydrant. A family of 4 needs about 1 gallon a minute, which is a genuinely tiny pump. And it needs no batteries whatsoever, because you pump while the sun is up and the tank stores the water. That is the whole trick. By the end of this video, you will know how to build it in a weekend. Let us dive in. Water is the only utility that falls out of the sky onto your property for free, and you pay a monthly bill for it anyway. A typical household water bill runs somewhere between $70 and $100 a month. Call it $1,000 a year, give or take, depending on where you live and how large your garden is. And a typical American household gets through roughly 300 gallons a day. Now here is the part that should genuinely bother you, and it has nothing to do with the price. Every single gallon arriving at your house has been through a treatment plant. It has been filtered, it has been disinfected. It has been tested, continuously, against drinking water standards enforced by law. Then, it has been pumped up to somewhere between 40 and 60 psi and pushed through miles of buried pipe to reach your tap. That is an enormous amount of engineering, expense, and chemistry applied to every drop. And what do you do with most of it? You flush it down a toilet. You put it on grass. You run it through a washing machine full of muddy clothes. You wash a car with it. In a normal climate, roughly a third of household water goes outdoors, and in a dry one, it is considerably more than that. None of those jobs require water that is safe to drink. Not one. You are buying pharmaceutical-grade water and pouring it on a lawn. And the strangest part of the whole arrangement is that the water itself was never the expensive part of that bill. You already have a water source. What you do not have is pressure. Start with the roof, because the arithmetic is simple and the number is larger than most people guess. Take the roof area in square feet, multiply by the annual rainfall in inches, then multiply by 0.623. That gives you gallons. Run it on an ordinary house, 2,000 square feet of roof, in a climate that gets 30 inches of rain a year. 2,000 times 30 times 0.623. That is roughly 37,000 gallons, landing on your house every year and running straight into a drain. And that is only the roof. There may also be a water table sitting under your feet. So the water is not the problem. The water is already here. The problem is that water sitting in a tank at ground level does absolutely nothing. It will not run a shower, will not fill a washing machine, and will not reach the far end of your garden. Water at 40 psi in a pipe does all of it. The city is not selling you water, it is selling you pressure. So the only real question is what it costs to make your own. The whole system is one line of arithmetic, and the answer is smaller than anybody expects. Take a family of 4 at 75 gallons per person per day. That is 300 gallons daily. Now divide that across 5 peak sun hours, because the pump only runs while the panel is producing. 1 gallon per minute? That is it. That is the entire specification. And 1 gallon per minute is a genuinely tiny pump, a DC submersible of around 140 watts, running at 12 or 24 volts. A complete kit with 400 watts of panels and an MPPT controller runs between $150 and $400, and those pumps will lift from as deep as 160 to 230 feet. Now the number that actually sizes the pump, because it is not depth. It is called total dynamic head, and it is the sum of everything working against you. The vertical lift from the water surface up to your tank, the friction inside the pipe, and the pressure you want at the far end. Here's the conversion that catches people out. Every single PSI of pressure costs you 2.31 feet of head. So if you want a respectable 40 PSI at the tap, you have added 92 feet to your total before you have lifted a single drop out of the ground. Get that number wrong and you buy the wrong pump. Get it right and everything downstream is easy. Then the hardware. In order. The pump moves water into storage. A 1,500-gallon poly tank costs roughly $400 to $600, and a 2,500-gallon tank runs $700 to $900. That is your buffer, and it is why this system works at all. And at the far end sits the delivery point, a frost-free yard hydrant, about $40. It is a standpipe with its shut-off valve buried below the frost line, so every time you close it, the riser drains itself and cannot burst in winter. One quick note, and I will come back to it properly before you build anything. This is a yard hydrant, which goes on your own private line. It is not the municipal kind. On the 11th of July, 1913, in a farming village called Maadi on the Nile, 15 miles south of Cairo, an American inventor opened a valve and pumped 6,000 gallons of water a minute using nothing but sunlight. The man was Frank Schumann, and what he had built was the first solar thermal power plant in the world. Look at the machine. 5 parabolic troughs, each one 204 feet long and 13 feet wide, mounted on mechanical trackers that turned them to follow the sun across the sky all day. Along the focus of each trough ran a boiler of blackened cast iron, sealed inside glass. The concentrated sunlight heated the water in those pipes to a little over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which was enough to make low-pressure steam. That steam drove a purpose-built engine of around 55 horsepower, and the engine drove pumps that lifted Nile water onto the cotton fields. The design was not entirely his own idea. The physicist Charles Vernon Boys had been sent by Schumann's investors to review the plans and told him to abandon his original flat glass boxes in favor of parabolic mirrors. Boys was right, and it made the plant far more expensive, which meant it had to be built far smaller than Schumann had originally intended. The opening was a colonial spectacle. Journalists, senior civil servants, and diplomats came out from Cairo in pith helmets and Panama hats, with parasols and champagne and caviar, and strolled between the long, gleaming rows of mirrors while the engine hissed and threw water across the desert. It worked. Schumann went to Germany and presented the project to the Reichstag, and was promised 200,000 marks to build a solar plant in German East Africa. Then the war came. In 1914, the British Army dismantled the plant at Maadi and took the medal for the war effort. Schumann died of a heart attack in 1918. And when cheap oil arrived in the 1930s, nobody had any reason to go back and finish what he had started. Solar-powered water pumping was not a theory that failed. It worked at industrial scale before the First World War, and it was taken apart for scrap by an army. Here's the part that makes a solar water system different from every other solar project you have ever seen. It does not need batteries. Every solar electricity setup runs into the same wall at sunset. The panels stop producing. If you want power at night, you buy storage, and the storage is the expensive half of the entire system, routinely costing more than the panels themselves. A solar water system simply refuses that trade. You run the pump during daylight, while the panels are producing. It fills a tank. At night, you use the tank. The water is the battery. And look at what kind of battery it is. A few $100s buys you thousands of gallons of storage. It does not degrade. There is no cycle count ticking down in the background. It cannot catch fire, it cannot enter thermal runaway, and it does not lose capacity because you left it in a cold shed over winter. The water in that tank will be exactly as useful in 20 years as it is tonight. This is not a clever workaround somebody invented. It is standard practice. Off-grid homesteads routinely skip pump batteries entirely and store water instead, for the straightforward reason that pumping into a cistern during daylight is simpler and cheaper than storing electricity to run a pump after dark. Then there is the second half of the trick, and it is even better. Put the tank uphill. Every foot of elevation gives you 0.433 pounds per square inches. So a tank sitting 50 feet above your house delivers about 22 psi at the tap, permanently, with no pump running at all. That is pressure stored as altitude. It works during a power cut. It works at 3 in the morning. It works when the panels are under snow. It has no moving parts, and it will not stop working in your lifetime. Let me be honest about where that runs out. 22 psi is not full household pressure. Modern fixtures expect 40 to 60. It is plenty for taps, for hoses, for irrigation, and for a yard hydrant. For a proper shower, you still want a small booster pump and a pressure tank. And that is the one part of this system that genuinely wants electricity on demand. So why is everybody still paying the water bill? Because of a confusion about what that bill is actually for. You are not buying water. The water fell on your roof for free. It is sitting in an aquifer under your feet. Nobody manufactured it, nobody imported it, and it arrives whether anyone bills you or not. What the city sells you is three things: treatment, pressure, and pipe. And every one of those is genuinely, unavoidably expensive. A municipal system runs a treatment plant that filters and disinfects to a legally enforced drinking standard. It tests continuously, because the consequence of getting that wrong is an outbreak. It holds pressure across an entire town, 24 hours a day, in January and in August. And it maintains 100 miles of buried pipe that somebody has to dig up and replace on a schedule measured in decades. Nobody is overcharging you for rain. You are paying for a treatment plant and a buried network, and both of those are real. So this is not a story about a scam. There is no villain in it. But here is where it becomes worth your weekend. You do not need drinking standard treatment for the toilet cistern. You do not need it for the garden, the washing machine, the car, or the livestock. You do not need a municipal pump holding 40 psi in a main so that you can water a hedge. And in a typical household, those uses are somewhere between a third and half of everything you consume. Now put that against the roof number from earlier. 37,000 gallons a year, landing on an ordinary house, running into a drain, while you buy back treated water to do jobs that treated water was never required for. A solar pump, a tank, and a hydrant costs a few $100s and lasts decades. It will not disconnect you from the city, and it is not trying to. The city is not selling you water. It is selling you drinking water. Stop buying it for the lawn. One thing must be absolutely clear before you buy a single part, because the word in the title means two completely different objects. A yard hydrant is a frost-free standpipe, about $40, with its shut-off valve buried below the frost line. Close it, and the riser drains itself, so there is nothing left inside to freeze and split. It sits on your own private water line. Farms have had them for a century. Entirely legal, entirely ordinary. A municipal fire hydrant is city property worth thousands of dollars. Connecting to one without a permitted meter and a backflow preventer is theft of water. It also degrades fire suppression on your own street, and it opens a contamination path straight into the public drinking supply. This build uses the first one. If you want the full build, the pump sizing, tank selection, the trench detail, and the filtration chain, we put together a complete walkthrough covering everything in this video and more. The link is in the description below. Here's the build, in order. Pick your source. For most people, that is a cistern fed from the roof through a first flush diverter, which dumps the dirty first few gallons of every storm before the clean water reaches your tank. If you have a shallow well and a permit, use that instead. Set the tank as high as your land allows. Every foot is free pressure and you never pay for it again. Run the DC pump from its own solar panel with a float switch, so it fills the tank and shuts itself off. No controller, no batteries, no electronics to fail. Trench the supply line below your local frost depth. Then set the yard hydrant on a bed of gravel, because that drain hole at the bottom has to actually drain. A hydrant that cannot empty itself is a hydrant that will freeze and split at the first hard night. Now 5 rules. 1. And this is the most important sentence in the video. Never cross-connect. A private supply must never be plumbed into any pipe that also carries municipal water, unless there is a proper air gap or a tested backflow preventer between them. Backflow does not only contaminate your house, it contaminates everybody on your street. 2. Rainwater is not drinking water. Untreated, it is fine for irrigation, flushing, and washing. Anything you intend to drink needs filtration and disinfection matched to an actual water test. 3. Check your permits. Wells require them nearly everywhere. Rainwater rules vary by state, and cutting your municipal usage very often does not remove the sewer charge or the standing fee. 4. Bury below frost and give that hydrant its gravel. 5. Mind the tank. A full 1,500-gallon tank weighs about 6 tons. It needs a flat, compacted, properly prepared base, and if you elevate it, that structure needs to be engineered rather than improvised. This will not take you off the municipal system, and it is not trying to. Rainwater yield depends entirely on your roof and your climate, and a dry year is a dry year. The sewer charge and the standing fee will very likely continue no matter how little water you draw, because most utilities bill sewer against winter water use and charge a connection fee regardless. Anything you intend to drink needs treatment and testing, and that is a real ongoing responsibility rather than a one-off purchase. And gravity pressure alone will not run a modern shower. None of that touches the honest win. The water going onto your garden, into your toilet cistern, and through your washing machine never needed to pass through a treatment plant. It never needed to be pressurized by a municipal pump, and it never needed to be bought. Frank Schumann pumped 6,000 gallons a minute off nothing but sunlight in 1913, and within a year, the plant was scrapped for its metal. The idea has been sitting there quietly ever since, waiting for somebody to build the small version. If discovering the practical, unglamorous corners of self-reliance matters to you, subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure this kind of knowledge keeps being found. We will be tracking all of it as it develops. Now I want 2 numbers from you. What your last water bill came to and how many gallons it was for. The dollar amount and the volume. I read every single one.